I never thought the sentence that would change my life would come from my own son, said so casually over a chipped kitchen mug, like he was commenting on the weather. He thought I was finished. He thought I was harmless. He was wrong. Hi, I'm Linda Harper. I'm 68 years old, a retired medical billing clerk, a widow of 11 years, and until recently, the kind of woman people talk over instead of listening to. I'm writing this because I need to get it out of my chest, and maybe because someone else out there is being quietly erased the way I almost was. Let me tell you how it started. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the kind that smells faintly of dust and old coffee. My son Mark was sitting at my small kitchen table, scrolling on his phone, one leg bouncing. He hadn't visited in months, not since his car needed a repair he didn't want to pay for. I'd made tuna salad, cut the crusts off the bread without thinking, the way I used to when he was little. That realization stung more than I expected. He didn't look up when he said it. "Mom, you don't really need money at your age." I laughed at first. A short, reflexive sound. "What does that mean?" I asked, already feeling something tighten behind my ribs. He finally looked at me then, like I was being difficult. "I'm just saying, you're not raising kids anymore. You don't go anywhere. You've got the house paid off. I'm drowning here." Drowning. That was his word. He had a wife, 2 kids, a house bigger than mine, and a habit of upgrading phones every year. But I didn't say any of that. I watched his fingers drum against the table, impatient, entitled. "I was thinking," he continued, lowering his voice like he was doing me a favor, "maybe you could help us out. Or at least, not worry so much about saving. What are you saving for?" There it was, clean and sharp. "What are you saving for?" I wanted to tell him about the nights I lay awake calculating medication costs, about the roof that leaked every spring, about the quiet terror of knowing no one would catch me if I fell. I wanted to tell him that money, to someone my age, isn't about luxury. It's about dignity. But instead, I said softly, "I worked 43 years, Mark." He sighed. Actually sighed. "I know, Mom. And you did great. But it's kind of selfish to just sit on it." Selfish. That word echoed in my head long after he left, taking with him the leftovers and my sense of safety. I stood at the sink, staring at my reflection in the darkened window. The woman looking back at me had thinning hair, yes, and lines around her mouth, but her eyes were still sharp. Hurt, but sharp. I didn't cry right away. I cleaned. I always clean when I don't know what else to do. I wiped down counters that were already clean, folded dish towels with careful precision. My hands were steady, but my thoughts were not. I raised him alone after his father died. I worked overtime, skipped vacations, learned how to stretch $1 until it squealed. I remembered nights sitting on the edge of his bed, promising him I'd always take care of him. Somewhere along the way, he decided that meant I owed him forever. That night, I opened a folder I hadn't touched in years. A thick one, labeled simply, "Assets." Inside were bank statements, insurance policies, the deed to the house, and something else, something I'd almost forgotten about. A savings account Mark didn't know existed. It wasn't enormous, not by today's standards, but it was mine, built quietly, patiently, over decades. Birthday checks deposited instead of spent. Bonuses I never mentioned. An inheritance from my Aunt Ruth that I pretended went straight into medical bills. I sat at the table, the same table Mark had leaned on hours earlier, and for the first time, I didn't feel old. I felt angry. And anger, I would soon learn, can be very motivating. A week later, Mark called again. This time he didn't bother coming over. "Mom, we're behind on mortgage," he said, skipping pleasantries. I could hear his kids yelling in the background. "We just need a little help. Temporary." "How much?" I asked. There was a pause. "Well, I was thinking maybe you could co-sign a loan, or sell the house and move in with us. You'd save money that way." "Sell my house? The house where I learned to live without my husband. The house where I cried, healed, aged, reduced to a line item on his balance sheet. "I'll think about it," I said. He relaxed instantly. "Thanks, Mom. I knew you'd understand." After I hung up, my hands were shaking. Not from fear, from clarity. Over the next month, I did a lot of thinking and a lot of quiet planning. I met with a financial advisor for the first time in my life, a woman younger than my son with kind eyes and a no-nonsense tone. She didn't talk down to me. She asked questions. Real ones. "What do you want your money to do for you?" she asked. The question stunned me. I wanted to protect me, I thought. I wanted to give me choices. Out loud, I said, "I want to stop being treated like I'm already gone." She nodded slowly. "Then let's start there." I updated my will. Not out of spite, at least not entirely, but out of honesty. I set up a trust. I made arrangements Mark would not expect. I didn't tell him any of this. Instead, when he called again, I let my voice sound tired, small. "I've been thinking," I said. "You're right. I don't need much." He jumped on it immediately. "Exactly. That's what I've been trying to say." I smiled to myself. The next time he came over, he walked through my house like it already belonged to him, pointing out what could be sold, what renovations would add value. He even suggested repainting the living room in more neutral colors. I watched him from my armchair, hands folded in my lap, and wondered when he'd stop seeing me. "You know," he said, standing by the window, "once you move in with us, this place could really help us get ahead." I stood then, slowly. My knees complained, but I ignored them. "I'm not moving," I said. He frowned. "But you said." I said I was thinking. "And I have." His jaw tightened. "Mom, don't be difficult. You don't need all this." Something in my chest snapped into place. "You're right," I said calmly. "I don't need all this." Relief flooded his face. Too soon. "I need more." He stared at me, confused. "I need respect," I continued. "I need security. And I need to know that if I say no, it means no." Silence stretched between us. Thick. Uncomfortable. "You're being dramatic," he muttered. "No," I said. "I'm being honest." He left angry that day, slammed the door hard enough to rattle the pictures on the wall. I sat back down, heart pounding, but lighter than I'd felt in years. That was the moment I realized something important. My son thought my age made me weak. What it actually gave me was perspective. And patience. And a very clear understanding of how much power I still had. If I'm being honest, the quiet after Mark stormed out scared me more than the argument itself. For the first few days, there were no calls, no texts. Not even the usual half-hearted thumbs-up emoji he'd send when I forwarded photos of his kids. The silence felt deliberate, like punishment. I'd raised him well enough to know exactly how to withhold affection when it suited him. That realization hurt in a slow, deep way, like cold seeping into bone. I kept expecting my resolve to soften. That's what always happened before. I'd replay his childhood in my head. The skinned knees, the spelling tests, the nights he'd crawl into my bed after a nightmare. Guilt was a muscle I'd exercised for decades. It usually kicked in automatically. But this time, something had shifted. Instead of calling him, I went about my days with a strange nervous energy. I reorganized closets. I donated clothes I'd been saving just in case. I started taking longer walks around the neighborhood, noticing things I'd ignored for years. The way Mrs. Donnelly watered her roses every evening, the cracked sidewalk near the park that I always stepped over without thinking. It felt like waking up inside my own life. A week later, Mark finally called. I let it ring 3 times before answering. Not to be petty. To breathe. "Mom," he said, tight and rushed. "We need to talk." "We are talking," I replied evenly. He exhaled sharply. "Look, I may have overreacted, but you have to understand, I'm under a lot of pressure." There it was again. His pressure. His stress. His life. I understand pressure, I said. I lived with it for 40 years. That's not fair, he snapped. Things are different now. Yes, I said quietly. They are. He paused, recalibrating. I could almost hear the mental shift, the move from confrontation to manipulation. He'd always been good at that. Emily's really struggling, he said, mentioning his wife. She hasn't been sleeping. The kids sense it. This whole situation. It's affecting everyone. Everyone except me, apparently. I'm sorry to hear that, I said. And I was. But I didn't offer anything else. Another pause. Longer this time. So, have you thought any more about selling the house? He asked. I closed my eyes, counted to 3. I've thought a lot, I said. And I've made some decisions. His tone sharpened. Like what? Like staying right where I am. That's it. His voice rose. You're just going to let us sink. I felt the old instinct surge, defend, explain, apologize. I let it pass. I'm not letting you sink, I said. I'm choosing not to drown with you. That did it. He exploded. Accused me of being selfish, paranoid, cruel. Said I was hoarding money out of spite. Said he never thought his own mother would turn her back on him. Each word landed, but none of them stuck the way they used to. When he finally ran out of steam, I said something I'd never said to him before. I love you, I said. But I don't owe you my future. He hung up without replying. That night, I didn't sleep much. Not from regret, from anticipation, because deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Mark wasn't the type to accept a closed door. He preferred to push until something cracked. I just hadn't expected him to go as far as he did. It started with Emily. She showed up unannounced one Saturday morning, standing on my porch with a tight smile and a store-bought pie. Blueberry. My favorite. Or at least it used to be. I hadn't told her that in years. Linda, she said brightly. I hope this is okay. I was just in the neighborhood. Lie number 1. I stepped aside and let her in. She walked through my house slowly, eyes flicking to corners, shelves, furniture, appraising, the same way Mark had. We sat at the table. I poured coffee. She slid the pie toward me like a peace offering. Mark's been so upset, she said softly. He feels like you don't trust him. I took a sip of coffee. It was bitter. I hadn't added sugar. This isn't about trust, I said. She nodded sympathetically. Of course, it's just. He worries about you being alone. At your age, anything could happen. There it was. The age card, played gently, but deliberately. I'm doing just fine, I said. She hesitated, then leaned forward. Have you thought about assisted living? There are some lovely places. You could sell the house, invest the money, and still have plenty left to help family. Help family. I set my cup down carefully. My hands were steady, but my chest felt tight. Did Mark put you up to this? I asked. Her smile faltered. Just a flicker. Enough. He just wants what's best for everyone, she said. So do I replied. She left 20 minutes later, the pie untouched. As soon as the door closed, I felt the full weight of what was happening. They weren't worried about me. They were circling. Over the next few weeks, the pressure intensified. Calls from Mark, emails with links to real estate listings, suggestions disguised as concern. Even the kids were suddenly encouraged to call me more, their sweet voices delivering lines that sounded suspiciously rehearsed. Daddy says you're lonely, Grandma. Daddy says we might come live with you. Each one landed like a small cut. That's when I did something I never imagined myself doing. I hired a lawyer. His office smelled like leather and old books. He listened without interrupting as I explained everything, my voice shaking only once. When I finished, he leaned back and folded his hands. You're not obligated to give anyone anything, he said calmly. including your son." I laughed. A short, broken sound. "I know that. I just didn't know how to make him believe it." "You don't," he said. "You protect yourself." We talked about boundaries, about documentation, about what to do if things escalated, and something in his tone told me he thought they might. I left his office feeling taller somehow. The next escalation came faster than I expected. One afternoon, I checked my voicemail and found a message from my bank. There had been an inquiry about my accounts. Not from me. I felt cold all over as I called them back. After a tense conversation, it became clear Mark had tried to access information using details he shouldn't have had. My social security number, my date of birth, information he'd absorbed over a lifetime of being my son. The betrayal hit harder than anything else. I sat at the kitchen table afterward, hands pressed flat against the wood, heart racing. This wasn't just entitlement anymore. This was theft. And suddenly, the idea that he thought I didn't need money at my age took on a much darker meaning. He didn't see my money as mine. He saw it as already his. That night, I made the most important decision of my life. I stopped trying to be understood. And I started preparing to be underestimated. There's a strange kind of calm that comes after fear burns itself out. Once I realized Mark was willing to cross lines, real ones, legal ones, something inside me went very still. I stopped jumping every time my phone rang. I stopped rehearsing conversations in my head. I slept better, oddly enough, because my mind was no longer cluttered with what-ifs. The threat had a shape now, a name, a direction, and that made it manageable. The first thing I did was change every password I had ever used. Banking, email, medical portals, anything that could be exploited. I spent an entire afternoon on the phone, answering security questions, setting up alerts. The woman from the bank spoke gently, the way people do when they sense you've been shaken. "Would you like us to flag any attempted access?" she asked. "Yes," I said, immediately. When I hung up, I sat there staring at my phone, thinking about how many times I'd handed Mark my purse without a second thought. How many forms I'd filled out with him sitting nearby. I had trusted him with the casual intimacy only a parent gives a child. Trust, I was learning, doesn't expire with age. It just becomes more dangerous. Mark didn't call for a while after that. Instead, he switched tactics. One morning, my neighbor Mrs. Donnelly knocked on my door, concern etched into her face. "Linda, dear," she said softly, "your son stopped by yesterday. He asked if I'd noticed you acting confused." The word hit me like a slap. "Confused," I repeated. She nodded. "He said he was worried, that you'd forgotten appointments, that you might not be managing well on your own." I felt heat rise up my neck. "And what did you say?" She hesitated. "I told him you seemed just fine to me, sharp as ever." I smiled, but it felt brittle. After she left, I closed the door and leaned against it, my heart pounding. So that was his play. If he couldn't guilt me, he'd discredit me. The idea that my own son might try to paint me as mentally unfit made my stomach churn. It wasn't just cruel, it was strategic. If he could convince enough people that I wasn't capable, decisions could be made for me. About my money, my house, my life. I called my lawyer immediately. "You were right," I told him. "It's escalating." He listened, then said, "We should document everything. Dates, conversations, witnesses." "Witnesses?" I asked. "You'd be surprised how often family disputes turn into competency challenges," he replied, "especially when assets are involved." Assets. Such a cold word for something that represented my entire working life. Over the next few weeks, I started keeping a notebook. Nothing fancy, just a plain spiral-bound pad I kept in the kitchen drawer. Every call from Mark, every visit, every comment from Emily. I wrote down dates, times, exact words when I could remember them. At first, it felt paranoid. Then it felt empowering. Mark eventually called again, his voice smoother than I expected. "Mum, I'm sorry," he said. "Things just got out of hand." I didn't respond right away. "I shouldn't have pushed," he continued. "I just worry about you." I almost laughed. "I'm sure you do," I said. "I was thinking," he went on, "maybe we could start fresh. Come by on Sunday. Have dinner. Talk things through like adults." "Like adults?" "I'll think about it," I said, using his words back on him. He sounded relieved. "Good. Emily will be so happy." Sunday came, grey and heavy with rain. I cooked anyway. Nothing elaborate. Roast chicken, potatoes, the kind of meal that smells like effort without looking like it. They arrived together, Mark and Emily, smiling too much. The kids followed, loud and restless. The house felt suddenly smaller, crowded with unspoken tension. Dinner was awkward but civil. Mark avoided the topic entirely, chatting about work, about the kids' school. Emily complimented the food. The kids argued over dessert. I watched them all, feeling oddly detached, like I was observing a scene from a distance. After we cleared the table, Mark leaned back in his chair. "So," he said casually, "have you given any more thought to the future?" There it was. "The future is coming whether I think about it or not," I replied. He chuckled. "You know what I mean." "I do," I said. And the answer is still no. His smile faltered. Emily stiffened beside him. "Mom," he said, lowering his voice, "you're being unreasonable." "Am I?" I asked. "Or am I just inconvenient?" He stood abruptly, pacing the kitchen. "You're acting like I'm some kind of villain." I met his eyes. "You tried to access my bank account." Emily gasped softly. "Mark." "I was checking," he snapped. "Making sure everything was okay." "That's not how that works," I said. "And you know it." The air felt thick. The kids had gone quiet, sensing the shift. Mark's face hardened. "You're going to regret this," he said. The words were quiet, controlled, threatening. "Probably," I replied. "But not for the reason you think." They left soon after. No hugs, no goodbyes. The door closed with a finality that echoed through the house. I stood there for a long moment, then slowly sat down at the table. My hands were trembling now, the adrenaline finally catching up with me. That night, I made another appointment. Not with a lawyer, with my doctor. I asked for a full cognitive evaluation, memory tests, documentation, paperwork that proved, officially, that I was of sound mind. The nurse looked surprised. "Is something wrong?" "No," I said. "Something might be." The tests took hours. I passed everyone easily. When the doctor smiled and said, "You're doing great, Linda," I nearly cried. I walked out with copies of everything. Insurance, protection. A week later, Mark made his boldest move yet. I received a certified letter in the mail. He was requesting a formal welfare check, citing concerns about my mental health and financial judgment. I sat at the table, letters shaking in my hands, and felt something inside me finally break. Not in despair, but in resolve. He wanted a fight. And for the first time, I was ready to finish it. The welfare check came on a Thursday morning, just after 9. I knew it was coming. The lawyer had warned me. Still, when the knock sounded, firm, official, I felt my stomach drop in a way that no amount of preparation can fully prevent. I took a breath, smoothed my cardigan, and walked to the door with my head high. 2 police officers stood on my porch. 1 man, 1 woman. Calm, polite, the kind of professionalism that told me they'd done this many times before. "Miss Harper?" the woman asked. "Yes," I said. "We received a request to check on your well-being." "I was expecting you," I replied, stepping aside. "Please come in." Their eyes flicked briefly over my home as they entered. Clean, orderly, lived in, but not neglected. The smell of coffee still lingered in the air. Sunlight filtered through the curtains. Nothing about the scene supported the story Mark had tried to tell. They asked me a few standard questions. How was I feeling? Was I managing my finances? Did I feel safe? I answered calmly, clearly. When they asked if I had any medical documentation, I handed over the folder I'd prepared. Cognitive evaluations, doctor's notes, everything neatly labeled. The male officer raised his eyebrows slightly as he flipped through the pages. "This is thorough," he said. "I like to be prepared," I replied. They stayed less than 15 minutes. Before leaving, the woman officer paused at the door. "You seem perfectly capable to me, Miss Harper," she said gently. "If there's ongoing harassment from a family member, you might consider documenting it." "I already am," I said. After they left, I locked the door and leaned against it, my knees weak. Then I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because the sheer audacity of what Mark had done finally hit me in full. He had tried to take my life apart piece by piece, starting with my credibility. And he had failed. I didn't call him that day. I waited. 3 days later, my lawyer called. "They overplayed their hand," he said. "The welfare request, combined with the attempted account access, it doesn't look good for him." "What happens now?" I asked. "That depends," he said. "What do you want to happen?" I thought about that for a long time. I thought about the years of sacrifice, the quiet dignity I carried without complaint, the way Mark had spoken to me like I was already fading, already irrelevant. "I want to be left alone," I said finally, "and I want him to understand why." So we did something simple. We sent him everything. Not emotionally, not angrily, legally. He received a formal notice from my attorney. Cease all attempts to access my financial information, cease making false claims regarding my competency, and all future communication to go through counsel. Attached was a copy of my updated estate plan. Not the full details, just enough. Enough for him to see that the assumptions he'd built his plans on were wrong. Very wrong. The phone rang less than an hour later. I didn't answer. It rang again, and again. Then a text. "Mom, please, we need to talk." I let it sit. That night, I slept like I hadn't slept in months. A week later, we met, in my lawyer's office. Neutral ground. Mark looked smaller there, less confident. His foot bounced nervously as he avoided my eyes. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," he said quickly. "I was just trying to help." My lawyer raised an eyebrow but said nothing. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and felt something unexpected. Not rage. Grief. "You told me I didn't need money at my age," I said quietly. "What you meant was that you needed it more." He swallowed. "That's not. You saw my years as leftover," I continued. "My savings as unused, my future as optional." Emily stared at the floor. "I need my money," I said. "Because it buys me independence, because it keeps me safe, because it reminds me I still matter." The room was silent. "You won't be receiving any financial support from me," I went on. "And if you ever try to undermine me again, the consequences will be real." Mark nodded stiffly. "I understand." I don't know if he truly did, but it didn't matter. That was the last conversation we had without lawyers involved. Life after that didn't suddenly become perfect. There were lonely days, holidays that felt quieter than I'd imagined. But there was also peace. A deep, steady kind of peace that comes from knowing your boundaries are no longer negotiable. I took a trip the following spring. Nothing extravagant. Just the coast. I stood by the water, wind tangling my hair, and realized something that made my chest ache in the best way. I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for permission, not for approval, not for the end. My son thought money was wasted on someone my age. What he didn't understand is this. Money didn't make me powerful. Deciding to value myself did. and that was something no one could take from me.